It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons. Back today with a new D&D Reacts going to the Fantasy Forge. Got a great video on how to run your D&D sessions like a campfire story. Relatively short video, so this one shouldn't take too terribly long. And we're going to see what he's got to say. Remember, this is the channel where we will hopefully one day give away a car. So anything you do, super chats, Patreon, memberships, they all kind of go towards that particular project, getting the Dodge Dart down here, getting it fixed up to give away. And hopefully maybe one day we'll have the first rally con where a bunch of us can drive across the country and enjoy some conventions and some gaming. Just a stupid YouTube dream for a guy talking on the internet. But anyway, like, share, subscribe, hit the hype button, all that fun stuff. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And we are going to go ahead and get this one cracking.
So let's be honest for a second, right? This is a safe space. Listen, we're primordial beings that have ascended to deity status, living in an eternal realm where their face is a perpetual flame, remembering what it was like to be mortal. And sorry, where were we? Look, when people talk about storytelling in Dungeons & Dragons, we love to throw around all the big stuff, like world building, epic villains, giant maps with too many rivers. Okay, maybe that's just me. But at the end of the day, being a dungeon master is less about this encyclopedic lore dump and all that knowledge, and it's really more about how you're actually telling the story in the moment. And the secret weapon here is pace. So let's talk about it. So think of it.
So this is obviously going to be a storytelling focused video here. I do disagree in a big way here. I think world building is one of the most important parts of having good storytelling in a D&D game, especially D&D, but any real TTRPG. The better your world is built, and the better that framework is, and the more realistically run it is, the more the stories emerge on their own. And natural stories typically don't need a lot of adjustment or tricks to keep the pace good. And the reason is because they will pace themselves naturally as the players pick up on the threads and start to follow them and start to build out their own narrative within. When they don't feel like you're leading them, then they don't have to follow at your speed. So giving them this, giving them the sandbox to play in, hating to use the term sandbox here because you can do this linear story progression, but allowing them to choose when and where they're on the road and at what pace they want to travel, the pacing for the story will generally work itself out. And in the places where it does kind of bog down, there's a couple of things you can do to push it. So that, without getting into some of the stuff he said about map making and some of the other stuff that I might have some disagreements with, to the tone, tenor, and topic of this video, I'm already starting by thinking that he is going to move into this from the negative connotation of storytelling GMs, where you're too story focused with the story as its own entity, as opposed to being a collaborative entity. But we'll find out.
A little bit like sitting around a campfire. That's how I like to think about it, because at the end of the day, D&D was created to be an in-person game because it existed in a world where there really wasn't the technology other than, phones to do it any other way. So a big part of role-playing and a big part of these TTRPGs, it really doesn't matter what system you're using, is purely the pacing and how you're telling the story, at least as a dungeon master, right? Like how you're telling the story, because you can have all of the knowledge in the world about all of the D&D realms, about everything in your world, you know every city by heart, but if you can't tell a good story, well, then it's not going to be fun for the players. So like I said, what I like to do is think about it like a campfire story, like you're telling a scary story. You don't drop every single detail of the plot all at once. You need to build the tension out. You speed things up when the danger is close. You slow things down when you want everyone hanging on every single word that you're saying. And that's what makes players listen and lean in, right? And that's what makes your table feel alive. And that's what brings that energy. And all of those sessions that you think back and you go, man, something about today's session was different. Something made the session really, really good. And I guarantee you, it probably came down to either role playing at the table, so story between players, or something that you did that got the players really, really involved.
Okay, so a little bit of a piece here. There's one, he is actually using one of my favorite analogies. I really dislike it when people jump up and like, oh, you're not a storyteller. You're not a storyteller. The game master's a referee. He's not a storyteller. He absolutely is a storyteller in 99.9% of TTRPGs. But he's a storyteller in the way that you tell a myth around a campfire, like a shaman laying out an adventure, laying out the beats of a story. And the players' imaginations are what fill in the details of how the fights happen. They're what fill in the details of how the decisions get made. He outlines the story and talks about Hercules' 7 tasks, and it can take him an hour. However, in that 1 hour story of Hercules and his tasks, the player that is Hercules and the other players that accompany Hercules take a year worth of sessions to flesh out those story beats. So in a way, you are the campfire storyteller, but the players are feeding you the details for you to then mold into the narrative that comes back out. Players give you information, actions, they give you details, you shape them, you retell them as the story based on the information given from the characters. But here's another way, and a more modern way to think about it. In the world of hip hop, which I do think it's hilarious that hip hop has somehow seeped quite a bit into my channel and into some of my discussions, because it's probably, it's on down there in my least favorite types of music. But basically I hate 90% of rap, but there are a handful of rappers who are skilled to the point that I can respect that and enjoy it as a talent and as an exercise in wordsmithery, if that's even a word, wordsmithing. But in early rap culture or hip hop culture, there was a thing called the cipher. And what the cipher is 4 or 5 guys would get around a fire burning in a barrel, because the modern day campfire on the street. And each one would put up the beat, and each one would go around adding to the story that they're telling of life in the street, drug game, whatever they're rapping about, culture. And each one is freestyling off of the one before them. D&D works a lot like that hip hop cipher. Each player is riffing off of the information. The DM is putting down the beat, and the players are riffing out the verses one at a time, adding to build that overall narrative flow that creates a complete circle, a complete thing. Or like jazz musicians is another place you see this a lot. You go to a jazz bar, you're either going to get the best music in the universe, or you might have complete and total crap. Why? Because they're not showing up with, we're going to play this set. They're not showing up with sheet music. What you got is, we've got a horn man, we've got a sax man, we've got a guitar guy over here, we've got a dude with the stand-up bass, and we're going to jam together. And you're either going to jive or you're not going to jive, and that's what's going to produce this super chaotic but fluid jazz music. That's really what D&D or what TTRPG storytelling is like. We sit around, and that game master provides that beat, provides that bass line, and the other players come in as the different instruments or the different rappers doing the ciphers, and they create the music that is the story, which the GM then turns around and produces as the story.
And that's not a fluke. That's something you can replicate, and it is a skill that you can learn. So let's talk about what pacing actually looks like in your game, right? First of all, it's about knowing when to linger. When your players enter a spooky forest, you don't rush. You don't describe the way the trees creak in the wind, the way the air feels heavy. You have to pause. You have to let them sit in that silence, because that pause is the pacing. You're giving them space to feel the mood. You need to let them digest. And then, when the wolves leap out of the underbrush, you snap the pace forward. You short, punchy sentences, no more long descriptions, because now the story's urgent and now they're in it. Now, the second thing to note is that pacing.
Okay, so that's actually something I've said on this channel before. That is an extremely good piece of advice, guys. Mood is set by the way you say things. Now, you don't necessarily need to let them sit and simmer with it in silence. Silence has a way of getting filled up, and typically filled up in inappropriate manners in these games. But when you're describing, say, that spooky forest or these investigative, contemplative things, use larger contemplative words, multisyllabic, complex sentences, detailed descriptions, things that force the player's mind to linger on details. Okay. And that will feed into the idea of walking in and soaking everything in. Because when you soak everything in, you take time to look, you take time to study. Combat action, it's gritty. This is the reason why you don't actually want a simulationist, realistic combat system, because nothing about combat feels like 4,000 dice rolls for all the different little variables. You want it to be very dirty, very abstract, and very quick. Why? Because the feel of combat is more important. That's when you use, like he said, punchy sentences, single syllable words, short things. You hit things, you punch things, you strike things, you break things. You have bruises, you don't have contusions, you have cuts, you don't have I'm trying to think of a long word for a cut, and one is escaping me right now. You tear and rend and rip. You use short, punchy, easy to understand visceral words and sentences without a lot of complexity to them. Because if my player is having to sit there and think through this long, complex sentence of what just happened in combat, I have made their brain work slow, and slow is not combat. Contemplative is not combat. Very good piece of advice there.
Is all about editing yourself. A lot of new DMs think that they need to explain every last detail of their world, but a good campfire storyteller knows when to stop talking. Nobody needs the full history of the kingdom every single time the party rides into a new town. Instead, try to give them one detail that matters. So if the town has burned out torches lining the road, or maybe the tavern has no music when it should be lively, that's a detail that does more than a 10-minute lore dump. that one detail does more than a 10-minute lore dump ever will, because you're pointing something out very specific that maybe they remember from last time, as opposed to trying to retell the same things that you've always told, or tell new things but sort of regurgitating that.
Oh no, someone's casting sleep on me. Ah, dang, they got me. Now here I am for 1 minute, according to 5e.
Okay, so after the ad read, which I'll clearly edit out, we go back and we think about what he was just saying about the details, and he missed an important thing. The detail you give needs to be relevant, in my opinion, to what kind of story beat you're driving. Like I said, you're not telling them the entire narrative. You are giving them the story beats for them to riff off of to create this story. And in order for you to do that, if you got them coming in, like he's talking about the tavern should be lively, should have a bunch of music, and that should be a sign. That's the detail that you should leave for this kingdom if that detail is relevant to what's going on. Okay, maybe it is a cultural part of that part of the world, but you want it to be something that plays into the conflict that's being presented, that plays into the story hook. It's kind of it's the lure, it's the bait that's on the story hook that gets them onto the beat that you're laying down so that they can put out a cohesive story and not have the chaotic mess of I ran off and did something completely different. So when you're picking those details, editing is not just about cutting out all the extraneous and extra. Editing is also about very carefully curating what you leave in. So make sure that the detail you leave is not just something that's set dressing that sets a mood. It's also something that plays into what they should be looking for to find the beat of the narrative that you laid down.
Did anyone else just dream of a sponsor?
Now, the third thing is that pacing comes from rhythm. Long stretches of talking are going to bore people. Long stretches of dice rolling are going to exhaust them. The magic in being a good dungeon master, or really specifically being a good storyteller at a TTRPG table, is finding that balance. You need to give them a tense social scene and then switch gears into a combat and then cool it off with some roleplay or some downtime. I like to think of it like music. You need those loud moments, you need those quiet moments, and you need the rests in between, because otherwise all you have is a consistent noise. And that's not what the players are there for. The players are there to play a game, and a game is dynamic. It changes. So if you can find the rhythm that works for your table, you will unlock something absolutely magical when it comes to your storytelling. And again, this is different for every table, right? That's why I can't say describe to them one paragraph and then a couple of quick sentences about the monster and what they look like and then roll initiative, right? Because for some people, they might want more description of the enemy. They may even ask you questions. Every table is going to have their own pace, but finding that pacing and finding that rhythm that works for your table is absolutely important to making them feel like they're in it, like they're ready to play. And then finally, the last piece.
So he's touching on what's right, but he's not quite getting to it. The key to finding that rhythm is, like I was saying, you lay down the beat and let them put the melody on top of it. All right. That's how you find the rhythm. The players will tell you the rhythm. All you have to do is listen to the way they riff off of each other, the way they bounce around. They will let you know if they need more prodding to move them in a certain direction, if they need more to get on the beat. They will also let you know if they're trying to slow things down. You simply have to listen. You lay down the beat, you let them lay out the melody. And he's absolutely right. It is different. It's not just different for every table. It's different for every type of game and every type of story and every type of adventure. Different moods, different feelings require different pace. And when you have buy-in, they will run it for you in that regard. You just have to be more focused on listening for the signals and less focused on trying to square peg around hole, so to speak. The biggest issue I think that he is coming across in the way he's presenting this is he's putting this all on the DM as the one who's responsible for steering the ship here, as the one who is responsible for controlling all of this. You really aren't. This is an art of guiding people into, this is a Pied Piper thing. This is playing the melody and having them fall in line and go of their own volition. This is not herding cattle where you're prodding them to get them in the right position. So there's a lot more, as my mama used to always say, God gave you 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth for a reason. And that's extremely important, even as a game master whose job is to be the mouth.
Campfire storytelling is very personal. When you're around the fire, you're not just telling a story. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you are sitting at that table with them, you're telling their story, right? You're telling the story of the characters and you're bringing the players into a world where they can forget that they are, Joe Schmo or whatever, but that they are Valandia. So drop their names into the descriptions. Look at them when you say something creepy. Lock eyes with them. Get close to them comfortably and with consent, right? But make them feel like the story is wrapping around them and not just happening in front of them. Because pacing isn't just about the speed of the story, it's also about how good you are at creating that sort of intimacy that comes with good storytelling. That's where you get the goosebumps, at least for me. And it's about knowing when to slow down and when to look at your players and when to say, then you hear a twig snap right behind you. Because that brings them in, right? It gets them hooked as opposed to just saying it, right? That little break between words really, really helps. So if you can bring their names into the descriptions, it can really, really elevate the experience for them. And on top of that, by saying their names, you're also sort of subconsciously making them think like their characters. And it really just does feel nice as a player to have your character called out by name. It's just one extra level of immersion. I don't know, that's just me. Players out there, let me know if I'm wrong. So if you want to be a better Campfire style DM, you need to stop worrying about how much lore you've written or how perfect your accents are and focus on pacing and focus on rhythm and slowing down when you want to and speeding up when you always make it feel personal, because at the end of the night, your players aren't going to remember, they're not going to remember the name of the Duke's second cousin twice removed, but they will remember the moment that you paused and gave them that shit-eating grin across the table and told them how their player died. Those are those things that are going to make them remember those sessions, and those are the things that make those sessions absolutely legendary. So anyways, that's what I've got for today. Let me know.
Okay, so that's overall pretty decent stuff. There's a lot of good there. There is a lot that can be improved on. One thing I'd say about that last part, here's a tip for you. Anytime you feel the urge to tell a player something internal about their character, don't. Let them fill it in. That's where you use their name. The twig snaps behind you. What's going on, Ariana, or whatever your name is, whatever your character's name is. Cecil, you hear a twig snap behind you. Then pause. Let them say, man, I'm like, what is that? How they say it, just like what they say, will give you a clue. Like, hey, the sweat rolls down the back of your neck as you snap around and you can't see anything. He told you he's going to turn to look. He's looking for what it is. What was it? And he gave you the hints that he feels anxious. His character feels anxious. So then you can describe it anxious and enhance it. As opposed to you say that, and in his head, he's like, I just kind of look back over my shoulder and say, hey, get out from behind the bushes, whoever you are, because he's the big bad fighter and he's not fazed by anything. Now you have a disjointed story because you took that from him. Let them react before you describe reactions so you know you're doing the right one. And that is a key piece of that kind of campfire collective storytelling. Anyway, guys, what do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. See you guys next time.